Hello and welcome. So I've had my cat's coming. So I've had my channel for about 2 years now, which means last year I did a video about unpopular opinions I get in like my comments and stuff. And since it's been a year, we're doing it again. So let's go. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is rat allergies. So a lot of people are allergic to rats. A lot of people, and a lot of people don't know it until they get the rats. Because, unless you know someone who owns rats, it can be pretty hard to figure out that you're allergic to them before you get them. Because unless you know someone who owns rats, you can't really handle them, so you just have no idea if you're allergic to them until you get them and you find out the hard way. And the thing with that is, just because you're allergic to one type of rat doesn't mean you're allergic to all rats. So, from my experience from talking to people, I personally am not allergic to rats, but from my experience of talking to people, intact males seem to have the worst reactions in people, cause the worst reactions in people, to the point where a lot of times people will either switch to females or switch to dwarf males or neutered males because they just do not have the same reaction to those kinds of rats. So if you really love rats but you're allergic to yours, I would suggest try handling, see if you can find someone who has them and try handling different kinds of rats, because especially if you have intact males, neutered males might be for you, female rats might be for you, dwarf rats might be for you. A lot of people are allergic to standard rats but not dwarf rats. There are a lot of options beyond just giving them up. Next up, let's talk bedding. This is the thing that pops up whenever you mention certain types of wood bedding. So the thing is, the long-standing rule has been that pine and cedar are bad for rats. Cedar, yes, do not use cedar wood for rats. Pine, however, can be fine for rats. Kiln-dried pine is fine because it removes the thing that causes the issues with rats. Now, aspen in the US is very easy to come by and a lot of people like it. Say that there is a difference between US beddings and other countries' beddings. I have noticed shavings in the UK are actually shavings. They're very thin, they're very light colored, they look very different. Whereas in the US, they're very dark, very thick. Sometimes most bags of bedding are gonna have really sharp shards of wood in them. So you have to be careful because you don't necessarily want that in the cage, because if a rat lands on it wrong, they can injure themselves, it can cause abscesses, that sort of thing. However, pine is in fact fine for rats. I personally don't like it because the smell drives me crazy, but other people use it and it's fine for their rats. If you're nervous about it, just stick with aspen. Aspen is also fine. It smells terrible. It's dusty as hell, but it is fine. The rabies are going crazy in there. Next up, we're going to be talking about medicine. So I got a comment earlier this year telling me that I was being cruel to my old rats by giving them medicine instead of letting them, pass away by not treating them. That's dumb. I'm sorry, that's a dumb opinion. So, me as their owner, I am the one who is with them all day. I'm the one who watches them. I'm the one who monitors them. I'm the one who knows what they need. You're the one who knows what your rat needs. You're the one who gets to call it when it's time to let them go. I do not have the opinion that just because a rat is old, that means that they are less worth treatment. And a lot of people seem to have that impression. I do think that surgeries become more dangerous as they get older. You have to decide what your threshold of when it's okay to stop doing surgeries is. For me, I start hesitating around 1 year and 11 months. But it's pretty much a no if they're over 2, because it becomes increasingly harder on them and on their systems to go through surgery, and it can cause a lot of extra issues. However, if it's something that can be fixed by giving them medication, I will almost always try that. The only time I won't is if it's a pituitary tumor, in which case I have to really evaluate how fast it's progressing, how bad off they are, what the overall situation is. So for example, with Fifey and Honey had heart failure and her medication stopped working and she was progressively getting worse. And she was starting to have trouble eating. And then Fifey had a pituitary tumor and it was very slow progressing. Fifey was 2 years and 7 months old and she would have been alone if I tried treatment for the pituitary tumor. You cannot fix pituitary tumors. All you can really do is slow them down. And sometimes you can slow them down for a really long time with cabergoline and prednisone. But the thing with that was, Fifi would have been alone. Because while I was waiting for those medications to see if they worked, she wouldn't have had Honey. And Fifi was a rat that really grieved when she lost her cage mates. So keeping her alone, just for me, just to see if the medicine would work, would have been cruel. So I chose not to. But then you have Honey, who had heart failure, and I absolutely tried those medications. Because just because they're old doesn't mean they're not worth trying for. Next we have the adopt, don't shop argument that I get in my comments a lot. I have mixed opinions, to be honest, because I do feel like people often use the adopt, don't shop to like be superior to people who do adopt from breeders. Now with my cats and my dogs, I have never gone to a breeder. I personally would never go to a breeder. My parents have. I don't judge them for that. At least for the dogs. Cats we just find. We just get cats. But for the dogs, they've gone to breeders. I personally never would, just because I feel like there's so many animals, cats and dogs, that are just congesting the shelter system that I personally would not go to a breeder. I would always go to a shelter. With rats, it's a little different. Rescues are overburdened right now with rats. They are. Because there aren't that many rat rescues, and a lot of times normal animal shelters aren't going to take them in because they don't have the expertise. So I personally try to have a balance of both breeder rats and rescue rats. In the rat community, breeders are viewed differently because you can find a reputable breeder a lot easier, and because they are not such a popular pet like cats, dogs, and rabbits, that you really have to consider how ethical it is to like leave animals sitting in a shelter because you want a certain type. So I do think that you can find reputable breeders for cats and dogs. Again, just for me personally, I would rather go to a shelter. I'm not going to judge anyone for going to a breeder that's reputable. I will judge someone for going to an irreputable breeder. But the thing with that is, with rats, I think you need to maintain a healthy balance. And as someone who's had a lot of rescue rats, I actually get bothered when people kind of talk down on rescue rats, because there's a certain language around rescue rats where it's just like they're going to be sicker, they're going to have temperament problems, they're going to just be a problem, and you should always go to a breeder if you can. And I don't like that. I don't like that argument. To be perfectly honest, I've had way more issues with my breeder rats than my rescue rats. And they can, yes, their temperament is not as predictable, but that doesn't mean they are going to have temperament problems. And for me, of my rescues, I've had one, Barber, who passed away young, and everyone else has either lived to the average lifespan or way beyond. So I just don't personally feel like there is as much of a difference in the bond you can have with rescue rats and breeder rats. Breeder rats are supposed to be healthier. I've seen some difference. Like I keep a spreadsheet because I am that kind of person, with just like all sorts of information, including the average age of my rescue rats versus my breeder rats. And I'd be happy to share that information with you guys. And there is a difference. The breeder rats do tend to live a little bit longer. However, I still have way more issues with my breeder rats than my rescue rats. Like their health is not that much better, to be honest. They're less likely to get tumors, but they get all sorts of other stuff. They get weird things that rescue rats don't get, and it is bizarre. And again, this is talking from a US standpoint. I understand the UK is different, but I do feel like you can get rescue rats that are just as good as breeder rats. So with that in mind, if you're getting rats, going to a reputable breeder or a rescue, either one is fine. This is one I get pretty frequently, which is people saying, well, my vet said my rat can't eat this, or my vet said that you should feed a pelleted diet, or my vet said that my rat should only be fed these things. It's one of my pet peeves, honestly, that people who work in a veterinary environment assume they know everything, or assume that vets are the end-all be-all of knowledge. So the thing with this is, I've met vet techs and vets who just have terrible rat care, who don't listen to anything from people who have way more experience, and then they end up with either a rat that's living alone, a rat alone in a tank, or they get pet store rats that end up pregnant or with pyometra or with horrible lung issues where they're just like coughing up, blood. Sorry to get graphic with that, but yeah, vets know medicine, they don't know husbandry. And to be honest, a lot of exotic vets do not know as much about rats as they do about other pets that are more popular. So an exotic vet covers pretty much anything that's not a cat or a dog or livestock. So the most common pet an exotic vet's probably going to see is a rabbit. So they probably know a lot more about rabbits and maybe guinea pigs. Guinea pigs are pretty popular right now. And then they do rats. Hi, Ursula. Hi. Hi, baby. They're just going nuts. And even more so, specifically with diet. Let's talk about diet because that's the comment I get the most about. You need to do independent research because vets aren't even taught proper diets for like cats and dogs because there's pet food companies that sponsor the courses where they're learning about diet. So a lot of times vets will recommend specifically those brands because they're the ones they know about, but they don't actually know a ton about diet outside of that. And that's a problem when they're trying to give you advice on food and then you're taking that advice as the end-all be-all of what you should feed. So I don't personally like pelleted diets. I have my mix, my Sheenamite mix, and a lot of vets don't like that. And I don't really care because I know I'm giving my rats what they need and what is good for them. You can feed a pelleted diet. It is technically everything they need in a little pellet. I just prefer to feed my mix because it's more enriching. It keeps their coats super soft. Their skin's healthier. It's easier to keep a good weight on them. They don't selectively eat because I scatter feed. That's how you avoid that. And they're just in general a lot healthier than when my rats were on a pelleted diet. They feel healthier. They're brighter. They're happier. In general, I think it's better, personally. And again, just keep in mind, vets know medicine, they don't know husbandry. So if your vet tells you to use fleece, that is not an excuse to use fleece. You need to do your independent research. If your vet tells you to feed a pelleted diet, if you choose to, okay, but do your independent research and not just go off what the vet says. They'll tell you things like you need to keep rats separated when they have a URI, when by the time you realize they have a URI, they've had exposure to everyone in the cage. The damage is done. But also, rats are born with mycoplasma, so they're already going to have that issue. Separating them is not going to fix anything. And it can be worse for them because it's very stressful for them to be separated from their rat companions, and the stress weakens their immune system and can make them sicker. So vets know medicine, they don't know husbandry. So a while back, I did a video on pet store rats discussing why I don't think you should get them. And naturally, as always, when people bring up pet store rats, there's someone in the comments who say, well, they need love too. That does not change anything I said. Those rats deserving a home, yeah, every animal deserves a home. However, you using that as an excuse to go get those rats just perpetuates the problem. But beyond that, yes, I agree. I agree pet store rats need love, which is why you, instead of going and getting the pet store rats, should go contact a rescue so that when the people who impulse bought those rats and then dumped them on the rescue, you can go give those rats who arguably deserve it more a home full of love. It's not a good excuse. And that's what it is. It's an excuse. Pet store rats are convenient, so people will find excuses to go get them. And those excuses are, well, I just didn't want them to be in those little cages, or they deserve love too, or well, they have to have a home too. And yes, all of that is true. But you're perpetuating the problem and you're ignoring the other animals that also need homes and deserve homes that come from that source that you could help without supporting the business that put them in that situation in the first place. Next up, we have intro cages. So normally when I do intros, I'm very clear that I use the carrier method. I explain what it is, and usually that does head off people being annoyed that I'm using the carrier method. But earlier this year, I forgot to do that in one of my videos, and naturally someone was just like, that cage is so cruel, what are you doing? That's not nearly big enough. No, it's not nearly big enough if that was their permanent cage. So the carrier method is a method of introductions where you take all of your rats that you want to introduce and you put them into a small space. Sometimes a carrier, it depends on the group size. Sometimes a carrier, I have a cage, it's a little green cage, that's actually about the same size as my carrier. So I put them all in that, and I do that because it's much better ventilated. It won't get quite as hot because the little cages get very hot because they're just all piled together. And I can give them water with ease, and I can scatter feed, and it's a lot easier. And it can look mean. I'm not gonna lie, it looks mean to have a bunch of rats piled together into a little cage. But the reason you do this is because when rats are in smaller spaces, they're less likely to fight. And when they're less likely to fight, they're more likely to bond because they're not mad. So they'll snuggle, they'll get their scent on each other, they'll work out some of their minor issues, and then once they've done that, you move them to a slightly bigger space and have them go through the process again, so on and so forth, until you get them into their full-size cage. And a lot of people don't like the carrier method because it looks mean, it looks cruel. And a lot of people say that it's trauma bonding and that is unhealthy to do with rats. I've had rats for 15 years, and by far the carrier method has been the easiest, safest way for me to introduce my rats to each other. It reduces the number of injuries, it helps them really get to know each other. It's just in general a lot better for them, and it's stressful for them and it's stressful for me, but doing other methods isn't going to make it less stressful for them. Meeting new rats is stressful. They don't like that because they're a prey animal. So anytime an animal that is introduced to their group that smells different, their instincts are telling them that that animal is going to bring predators to them, and they need to get rid of them before that happens. So even no matter what method you use, it's going to be stressful for them. I choose the carrier method because it's in general faster and safer for my rats. This is kind of a minor one, which is I give my rats treats sometimes, like birthday treats or pancakes, stuff like that. Not often, but I had someone worried that the baking soda in the pancake was going to negatively affect rats because baking soda is used in rat poison. And yes, high doses of baking soda is not good for rats, not really good for any animal. However, in food, in baked goods, the amount is so little per portion that it wouldn't be a problem, but also the chemical change of it's not raw baking soda. It's been changed and cooked and all that stuff to make it into a pancake. So it's not really dangerous. You can give your rats baked goods that have baking soda in them, which also leads us to the next thing, which is sugary treats. I gave my rats whipped cream and people freaked out. It's fine to do that, to give them some sugary treats occasionally. You don't want to do it consistently because it'll make them gain a ton of weight. You don't want that. It's bad for their joints, it's bad for their overall health, it's bad for everything. But an occasional treat is fine, especially when at the time I had, I think, 10 rats that were over 2. I currently only have 4 rats that are over 2, so it's been a bit. But yeah, I had 10 rats that were over 2, one that was over 3. I wanted to give him whipped cream, I gave him whipped cream. So basically it was a little pup cup that all the rats had to share. But yeah, you can give them sugary treats and you can give them stuff that has baking soda in it. You just have to be careful to not make them ill or give them too much. So don't give them raw baking soda and don't give them too many sugary treats, and you should be fine. So with all of that, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you know what to do. All the fun stuff down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.